All right, ladies and gentlemen, after a month's hiatus, the boys are back in town. We've got Luke Summerfield on the bass,
Oh, geez, we're doxing.
bass and drum. Oh, are we doxing?
I
Oh,
don't
whoops.
know.
Well, okay. And then Muggs McGinnis on saxophone.
Did you say I'm on the bass and drums?
I
Ooh,
know it's pretty good.
that is pretty good.
Yeah, yeah.
Let me think. That'd be tough, even with like a synthesizer next to me. I'm sure
Well,
I could manage.
yeah. Get creative. So we wanted Muggs had questions about Russia and China. So here we go. Where do
Well,
we
you
start?
you just gave a great summary of that they have common interests, and yet they've had this long border apparently, and that the United States is a common foe for both.
Yeah, we made ourselves the common foe. Kind of dumb.
Yeah,
We should have tried to split them apart,
yeah.
What
but we didn't.
What do you mean? Why is that dumb? We're the hegemons of the global blah blah blah. You know why we are not scared of anybody.
Yep. Mike. Everybody's afraid of Mike Pompeo. I mean, a withering, pathetic, all bark no bite hegemon that can't even overthrow Bashar al-Assad or Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. But yeah, sure, a hegemon. Like what? No, with the as far as the U.S. goes, it's no worse friend, no better enemy.
Okay, but can we just for my
Yeah.
sake, can we explore this because it's a very common cultural meme, right?
Right.
For the nationalists and patriots anyway, right?
Right.
To sort of well, if I went down to the bar, which I'm not doing at the moment,
Right.
but and took a survey and said, "Are you scared of Russia? Are you scared of China?" You'd get all sorts of,
Braggadocio.
braggadocio. So what is what's the essence of this braggadocio? What sort of justifies?
We have a big nuclear arsenal, and we did finish second place in the race to collapse because of the Cold War, but um, there's an undertone in I've noticed it's oh man, what is it? A substrate of thinking in both the People's Daily and Russia Times where they're making fun of us,
Mm-hmm.
and we are not behaving like an actual hegemon. Actual hegemons make alliances that matter and actually tell other people to do what to do and actually do do things, have policies that are beneficial to itself in the long run. Whereas even with the United States at this point, it's like even when you win, you lose. Like we've been in Afghanistan 20 years. We can't defeat the Taliban, and it's costing us more than any benefit we're getting out of it. So it's all we're a legacy empire. We're an empire that's in the process of getting unwound right before our very eyes. The guys at the bar with the braggadocio and all that are probably old and aren't on with the times. They haven't been paying attention for a while.
Sure. Well, and I guess the things yeah. I mean, the braggadocio doesn't. It's sort of independent of paying attention or not. Like it's not based in things I see or things I notice. It's based in the American myth.
Yes.
So
And the myth it can't calibrate itself to reality. All you got to do is just lob questions at them and be like, why do we have to support Saudi Arabia and Yemen? Why did we abandon the Kurds to the tender mercies of Bashar al-Assad and Recep Erdogan last year? Actually, it was only like 10 months ago. Why? Why did we do that? And they'll have no answer. It's just America is the greatest. It's like saying God is good. Oh, okay, whatever. But this doesn't have anything to do with reality on the ground.
Or why Germany? I mean, why the attitude for Germany too? I mean, an ally,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Withdrawing NATO troops.
yeah,
Huh. Sounds like retreat to me.
yeah. So, is there a motivation? I mean, this didn't start with Trump, but I think Trump has accelerated it.
Oh yeah.
Is there a motivation that the Trump administration has for doing this?
I mean,
Or is it just...
Okay, well, there's kind of two ways to see it. Like every now and then, individuals come along in government who can actually have the will and the means to do the necessary reform and the backing of the broader society. Trump is none of those things. And honestly, the Trump administration, quote, is like Bigfoot or mermaids or whatever. You can speculate all you want about mermaids. You know, are they male and female? Are they hermaphroditic? Do they have external fertilization or internal? But it really doesn't matter. There's no such thing as the Trump administration. There isn't. But he's at the helm of a dying empire. The helm. The helm is a room with a tiller on it that has no connection to the drive chain. You can't do anything about the inertia of this Titanic, you know? Yeah. It's so he can't make any decisions because he's not a human being with free will the way most individuals are. Right, yeah. But even if he was, he can't really do much. He could not really do much about it. So yeah, NATO's in pell-mell retreat. Of course we're withdrawing from Germany. It's too expensive, and NATO is a fossil and has no functional purpose. Yeah. The original purpose of NATO was, and I'm almost quoting somebody, Dulles or something, or maybe Eisenhower, I don't remember, but it was to keep Germany down, Europe in, and Russia out. Well, it's a bit late for that. That's a 70-year-old axiom. Yeah. Nothing lasts forever. Yeah.
So, what does it do now?
This creeping avalanche of failure. It keeps creeping in an avalanche of failure in a strange way. I don't know, but all economic dynamism in the world is not happening here because the overhang of debt and government debt and all the other kinds of debt and social obligations like Social Security and whatnot means that any economic activity gets sucked up into things like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, military spending. What are you going to invest in new things in the United States or Europe, you know? The estimated cost for rolling out the molten salt reactor just for the United States, I got it wrong on a previous episode, but if the United States was to keep its hydroelectric but convert all other forms of energy, fossil fuel energy, to molten salt reactors, all of it. So all of our electricity is molten salt reactors and hydro, because it doesn't emit CO2, would cost $3 trillion. Well, we just printed $7 trillion to do what? To do what? So there's no future. You know, that's what I mean. It's just legacy. It's all legacy. We're being unwound. And that's fine. That's actually good. It's far better than that moron at the bar drunkenly talking about nuking other people. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Hold on to 3 nuclear weapons, you know, just in case you lose one and have to use another one, and then you have a spare. All the rest should be pulverized, melted into molten salt reactors, and fire them up. Yeah. You want to talk about making America stronger?
Yeah, I was thinking about that because I was listening to one of these other things we did. And you mentioned the $3 trillion in the printing money, but also we were talking about, you know, the nuclear stockpile a little bit, right? And you know, I can't remember what the number was, some 2,500 or something.
Of what, nuclear weapons?
Yeah,
you have? I think it's more like 25,000.
Oh, okay, jeez. Yeah, but then I wondered, you know, if you were trying to sell disarmament, even to someone, maybe not the most idiotic idiots of like, oh, let's make it glass. Yeah. But someone who is somewhere on that spectrum, but still sort of worried about national security.
A cold warrior.
Yeah, a cold warrior, sure. Like what? Because I was thinking three sounds like too few. You couldn't sell that to them.
No.
But 50 is a big number. Could you sell them 50? And try and sort of obfuscate the fact that 50 is a lot less than 25,000, but say, hey, we'll keep 50.
Yeah,
that's a lot. count to 50. It
Yeah.
takes you a while.
Yeah.
You know, like what would be a number that you could almost, not that you need to appease, not that you need to appeal to these sorts of folks, but say you wanted to appeal to these sorts of folks, you know.
I
50. Well,
Yeah.
no, that's too low. Okay, how about we all know 100's a big number.
Yeah. You're not wrong, Luke, but when I think on, some of these guys, Nikki Haley, Mike Pompeo, these others, oh God, Henry Kissinger, I think once you
May
get
he live forever.
I hope he lives to be 400 years old. He may, if he's not, but you get one taste of perceived omnipotence, and you can't ever go back.
So there's inertia.
Oh yeah, jeez.
It's inertia, bureaucratic,
Yeah.
economic, in the sense of maintaining and building and keeping those things brings a lot of jobs and money to different areas, I suppose.
Yeah, military-industrial complex.
Yeah.
This is it.
Yeah.
This is its fruits.
Yeah.
And it's just fucking stuck. What are we? We're trying to. You could talk about the petrodollar. The use of the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency because Saudi Arabia prices their oil in dollars, which forces the market, the whole oil market, to be bought and sold in dollars. So everybody needs dollars because everybody needs oil. Brilliant maneuver. Nice going, Richard Nixon. But now it's the millstone hanging around our neck, isn't it? We don't see the benefits of it, really, when you look at the homelessness and the fact that we can't have a healthcare system and stuff. Well, why is that? Oh, and then why did they have to print $7 trillion just this year to support the consumption habits of the American citizen? We used another example of Spain at the height of its empire, the first global empire. They had the mines of Potosi in Mexico. They had the slave plantations of cash crops, sugar, indigo, those are the main ones, cotton, in the Caribbean.
Were they doing coffee yet?
I don't know. I don't think so. Yeah, that would have been later. Coffee came through the Ottoman Empire. There were Turkish coffee houses before that made it to like Vienna, so that would have been 1600s. But they had all this money flowing in, and I mean, there's a good lecture I'd love to share with you guys, listen to with you guys, but it hollowed them out because it caused malinvestment. They had so much easy silver coming in, they didn't circulate that money into good investments in Spain itself. They frittered it away in Charles V's, the big cheese, Holy Roman Emperor, on silly wars against Protestants, and then Philip II, his son in Spain, was even worse. And so the money actually ended up hollowing out Spain, and it just went through it. It went all to his armies and all to the bankers who he needed to pay to keep the armies going, And so Philip II, with all his wealth and overseas empire and all that, the son of the mightiest Holy Roman Emperor who ever lived, Charles V, Philip II had to declare bankruptcy 3 times.
Well, how do you mess that up?
Be Catholic.
Right,
Fight for Catholicism.
You've pretty got basically free money that's extracted and exploited out of slave labor and overseas extraction
and
projects.
A frontier, yeah,
and then you can't even use that to bolster your own empire or civilization.
Yep.
How do you mess that up?
How do you mess that up? It's a very good story that a lot of would-be imperialists really ought to look into, because Spain was the real deal. I mean, they fought everybody. There's a famous lithograph of Charles V enthroned, and all of his enemies that he defeated are coming to his court throughout his lifetime. And one of them is the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, because he fought them in the Mediterranean and won. He was really something. But the mechanics of it are kind of inexorable, inevitable, this slow avalanche of failure because the dynamism was lost. The dynamism of the early conquistadors was replaced by bureaucratic types and just by the horrible, inescapable, the inescapableness of that sort of empire that's extractive instead of investing.
Right, one of these inevitabilities, and also sort of the, not to, not to be cliche. That's all I ever am. But sort of monkey's paw / careful what you wish for. You just might get it, or we're the scrappy upstarts. But as soon as we got what we wanted, now we're the lazy gentry.
Yes. Privilege is expensive. Those early conquistadors, a lot of them were second, third sons. They were guys who had fought the Moors, who were only kicked out in 1492. Pizarro, Cortez, and those guys, they were tough. Oh my fucking God. They were not these effete, effeminate, dandy aristocrats. No.
When you say they were second or third sons, you mean the older son
inherited the estate
I
into
got
steel.
that. Yeah, no, I understand.
Wow.
The younger son had to go overseas to make his
Either
fortune.
that or become a priest, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was more crossover than you might think on that.
Yeah.
There were some tough, scrappy priests who were the third son. You took the cloth. Yeah. You're not wrong.
I mean, that was true in European culture, not just Spain. I think.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the early Catholic Church, man. You had fighting bishops.
It's so. Obviously, this is going to probably be oversimplified, but
Everything
if
is.
you're the first son, then you're the heir apparent, and you don't really need a job.
No.
Maybe you go and you probably don't even go into business.
No.
That's probably second, third son material.
If you went into it was embarrassing to be a businessman if you were landed gentry.
Right. No,
You're not
you don't
touching
do
money.
anything.
Yeah.
Right. And
You are toilet paper to me.
So then options for even the most privileged of families, second and third sons, are like officership, which is still pretty nice.
Yeah.
But maybe you actually see a campaign.
Yep.
Well,
it's either that
maybe
or
you actually get mud on your boots
Or
once or twice.
Yeah. Because you were educated also, with the and the union of like the interests of the crown, the priesthood, and the nobility. That was part of the dynamism of the Spanish monarchy.
How about scholarship?
Every now and then, but
right?
this is...
because even in like the history of our scientists, our physicists, our geometers, like they're very rarely coming from the streets.
No, not at all.
They're comfortable folks who
have
have leisure time
Yeah.
to be polymaths, right?
Yeah.
So,
But I mean, it's just the window is different because you're absolutely correct for about a century later. That's all.
oh, okay, gotcha. Gotcha.
Not a lot of scientific innovation came out of Spain.
Yeah. Frank Soloway has written a book, a controversial book, decades ago called Born to Rebel, where he analyzed the scientific revolution, the French Revolution, and I forget what else. And what he found was that it was the younger siblings that tend to be the innovators. Because they already are, their options are less, and now obviously they're coming from privileged families too, apparently. But he said born to rebel, to go against the system because they didn't. But he would trace its roots apparently back in biology.
Sure.
Because perhaps this could have gone back into inheritances, however it worked in our ancestors. But it was a very controversial book. I think there was a challenge to his data. He never came completely clean with it, but he called it Born to Rebel. And if you look at the scientific revolution, the French Revolution, and somewhere else, tried to analyze who were the people that were leading these revolutions, it was statistically far more likely that they were a second or third born son, by the way, than a firstborn son. Yeah. The firstborn inherited the cloak of the past.
And it was in their interest to do so. You're not going to challenge a system that just gave you a 1,000-acre estate with all these peasants. And the younger son, man, are you really going to hang out at your older brother's estate and lick his boots.
We'll take a look at the Windsors in our century. I mean, think about that. How would you like to have been born into that family?
Ugh.
Your roles are set. I mean, who would want to be born? I like the royalty I was born into. Working class family, loved their, worked hard.
Yeah.
It's something I still, and again, it might be a time problem, like a history problem in my head, because I get confused about when things are happening. But watching these dumb like British dramas, right, that are period set,
Right.
maybe
Yeah.
Victorian, maybe Edwardian, I
Yeah.
I don't remember, but all these folks that to me look like rich folks always end up, or a lot of them end up with money problems. I don't get it. It's like, wait,
Yeah.
how are you of this class but really need a good marriage and then to be a kept man? Like, I still haven't
Yeah.
figured that
Oof.
shit out yet.
Well, because they did accumulate debt, and there was see, that's the thing. We talked about but dynamism versus privilege, right?
Right.
So yeah, you inherited this estate. You also inherited its dets.
Right.
His dad was a gambler.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you've got these
How do you make money?
foppish dudes who
Yeah.
are on allowance from their wife's money.
Yes. And a lot of times it was, in some societies, it's actually forbidden for the gentry or the landed elite aristocracy to engage in commerce, because that's something that only lower class people are allowed to do. And so in the best case scenario, they would be silent partners with some enterprising guy out in the city. It's like, yeah, I'll invest in your ship. Oh, you've got some estates in Hispaniola growing sugar with slaves. I'll invest in that, but you got to keep it mum. Whereas if you didn't have that opportunity and you had a really maybe, yeah, you're landed gentry, but it's very rocky, thin soil, and you don't have very many peasants. You're not rich, even though you're privileged. And it's difficult to kind of up and move as, like, let's say maybe industrialization is happening or something. An interesting example of how around the year 1000, well before all this is going down, one reason why the ancient Chinese dynasties before the 20th century seldom had really serious revolutionary peasant uprisings is that, strangely enough, their landed gentry managed to successfully integrate into the dynamism of markets in the cities as silent partners. And so an enterprise, so the borders were a little bit more porous, maybe almost because it was such a big, diverse empire. We're talking like the Song or like the Ming, where there's an ancient family way out in the country that has some big estates and a lot of accumulated wealth and whatnot, but there's a whole lot of wealth happening and being generated in the coastal cities. They would invest. And also, though, an enterprising businessman in the cities, in Nanjing or something, would use some of his money and buy some estates in the countryside. And maybe eventually his daughter might marry an aristocrat's son and fold. So their interests coalesced a little bit closer. It's not a coincidence. It's just something that happened. Whereas in Europe, the lines were a little bit more rigid, and industrialization took everything by such surprise that in the case of like France and Russia especially, the aristocrats held on too long, and then there was too much energy and wealth in the hands of lower class people, and you had these explosive events like the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution. French Revolution is peasants killing aristocrats, poor people and middle class people killing aristocrats. 17 what? I think my date's right. 85. There's aristocrats in control of the French government, and yet nobody except the aristocrats are allowed to be in it. 1800, it's a little different. So, yeah, that was kind of a rabbit hole. Privilege versus dynamism.
This is way off base in a way, I guess, but when you're talking, I can't hear. Did Shakespeare capture any of this in his plays? I mean, I could never read Shakespeare. I couldn't. I didn't understand it. But I mean, here he is with these kings and sons and murders and stuff. I mean, was any of this? Do you think there's any of this evident in Shakespeare, or do you know
this dynamism, this sort of interface?
Well, I mean, in terms of here you have power.
Right.
That is dissipating or whatever. I don't know. It may be just a stupid question.
It's before industrialization. It's Elizabethan.
But even before that, if you have like the Spanish with the sons that had to go into the army and this competition amongst siblings, perhaps. I mean, it just occurred to me that this might. I've never read Hamlet or Macbeth.
Really?
I mean, I tried.
Really?
I tried. I couldn't follow the English. Well, I tried when I was 20 and 22, and
that was before they had those nice ones with the actual text on one side and the notes on the other that help you figure out what the reference is.
Besides, I became interested in natural history. I mean, I honestly did.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I did. And fiction.
Screw these humanities. Oh, fiction. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But
I mean, it's all there. The stories are the same.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like the richness of that dynamic. I would say so. But there was nothing quite like class consciousness the way we
talking about today.
Yeah. Because I mean, we do live in a world that is a hell of a lot better than one with hereditary aristocracy.
No.
That sucks. It's logical in an all-agricultural, non-industrial society. There is real logic to it.
Yeah.
That, here's this estate. The only way to create wealth is to grow crops on land. So, of course, there's going to be a group of people who's like, well, I inherited this from my dad.
Yeah.
It sucks, but it is logical. And it happens, it's a universal thing. It's over and over. It is in the Americas before Columbus, pre-Columbian. It is in Southeast Asia. It's everywhere where agriculture rises.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that because when I first moved here, I got very interested in the history of this place. And I wondered why it was called Clover Creek. We may have talked about this once before. Why is it called Clover Creek? Well, I couldn't find anything about that. But I did find out that at least the natives in parts of southern Canada and up in that area, they actually had families inherited patches of clover along the creek. Yeah. And I wonder if that might have, but that was again something that was stayed with probably from family generally, not to one person. But whatever it was, some sort of a family-based being able to harvest the clover.
Kin groups.
Yeah.
It used to be the case.
What are they doing with clover?
Eating it.
Eating it.
Oh, okay.
It's
just
delicious.
Like greens.
Yeah, it's green. Yeah, high protein green. Yeah. Kinship groups used to be almost synonymous with property rights.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's that same. It's the same thing, but it's universal. Yeah. So
I just thought of a question.
Yeah.
I mean, and the answer might be when agriculture was invented, but when was aristocracy invented? And clearly, invented might be a bad word.
Yeah.
But
oh boy, I mean, an aristocrat is somebody who inherited a lot of wealth from his family.
But you're saying that was happening in the pre-Columbian Americas.
Yeah. Oh, geez. Here's an interesting artifact. When the first Spanish guy, Francisco de Orellana, to go down the whole length of the Amazon Valley. I've stood at the head of the canyon in Ecuador where his expedition started. And he went down and he went east all across the Amazon. And he wrote about these huge cities that weren't there 200 years later, partly because of the disease and the devastation. But an artifact of that's really unusual is that there was vestigial traces of aristocratic privilege in some of these tribes that had fled the Spanish into a less sophisticated, structured society.
Interesting.
Which is unheard of in actual hunter-gatherers that have never had agriculture. So when anthropologists found that out, they were like, what the fuck is this? This doesn't make any sense. The cart is before the horse.
Right.
People,
they had inherited it from
a more,
landed version of their society.
Yeah.
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 Huh.
It'd be the equivalent of if we were invaded by extraterrestrials and they use biological weapons, and 150 years from now there's some person with the last name of Gates who has this weird claim to something called Microsoft.
Microsoft.
Yeah. You know.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
got
yeah.
Its, I'm sure it's got its roots in all cultures.
But
It's-
you're
it's-
it's
but
a
in that
human.
but in that thought experiment, it manifests in material ways.
Yeah.
Like
it does.
he actually that weird dude with the last name Gates is actually given some privileged.
Yeah.
But,
Even if it's kind of symbolic, like
Right.
it was fairly symbolic. It was just almost like, well, your family is somehow superior or better.
right.
Uh,
What a shitty thing to inherit.
Yeah, but I mean, okay. I mean, like, did you guys ever, growing up in your town, have that fucking moron or family that was like, well, actually, we're descended of the Habsburgs or something, or they had some goofy. There was a guy in my town who claimed that, like, somehow he was related to the King of Ireland or like the High Kings of Ireland. Like his family came from Meath. And they emigrated, but they have and I'm like, oh yeah, like there's a King of Ireland now, but there are Americans who sit there and fucking have their pedigree
Yeah.
back to European something or something,
The
and it's
daughters of the American Revolution.
Yeah.
yeah, it's pathetic. Or the Pilgrims, like people, old money, people who are like, well, my ancestors trace back to the Pilgrims.
Yeah, which is I mentioned this one. We talked about it once before. Is that every one of your genes has been in contact with every other human's genes in the not too distant past.
Yeah.
Period. And then it goes on to the trees, all other animals, the
yeah.
trees, the fungi. I mean, this is a.
Oh, don't tell them that though. They're Pilgrims.
But this comes back to what does this have to do again with sort of an evolutionary understanding of this? Genes reflecting this, especially in father to son and keeping it within clans and family. That's also a way that these, or is it a meme? Is it like a gene or like a meme?
It's a meme.
Yeah.
Because that person who a very long time ago, who has an ancestor who was a stupid religious fanatic who...
That's not my question.
Right,
I
okay.
understand that.
Oh, okay.
I understand that, but the whole idea that somehow inheritance counts.
Oh.
I mean, I think it would be tough to distinguish because it happens in just about every culture, right?
Right, but I think that's just, oh man. Because, okay, so yeah, parent-child transmitted, the ownership parents feel towards children and whatnot. But I'd say it's honestly more of a meme. It's not like they knew about genetics.
No, I don't. I'm not saying that.
Right.
I mean, the fish that changes from a male to a female,
Yeah.
or vice versa, doesn't know about genetics either.
Right.
Right. I mean, but it's a behavior that evolved.
Mm.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
And so that you can have behaviors which evolve that work because those behaviors also lead to more. Usually, it's going to be from the male side, more grandchildren,
Right.
and it's going to be via the male. I mean, you understand why that would happen?
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I'd say, broadly speaking.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not even. It's certainly, there's not an ideology of aristocracy.
No, I
Yeah.
understand that.
Yeah.
I understand that, but it could have roots that way, and then of course once the meme becomes more successful.
Oh yeah, it's just,
Yeah.
because there's the aspect of accumulated capital as well, and real wealth that actually matters. Like some guy who is a direct descendant of, a king, but is poor as hell, has to function in a world where people want to be actually paid for things, and like, you are, And I mean, history is just littered full of these guys who are hangers-on at other successful or more dynamic countries or kingdoms' courts. He's a pretender to the throne.
Right.
Very useful to keep around.
Is there a Romanov alive? I mean, this sort of.
Oh, there
thing,
are.
No, but I understand. But I mean, claim to somehow this gives them privilege.
Yeah, and that's the danger of it, because I mean, here's a really good example: is the scions of the House of Osman in the Ottoman Empire. They weren't allowed to be in the Republic of Turkey. They could not legally come in. It's like in the Constitution with Ataturk, because they were so dangerous. because if they show up, there's enough supporters to actually challenge the Republic. And I think recently it's kind of like, well, the feeling of those claims has died down enough, and there's not enough actual support that they're allowed back into Turkey now. But you can go and find them. There are like 3 pretenders to the French throne, because as it broke down, there's like the Agnatic line and this other one. There's not only is there a pretender to the French throne, there's other. They fight amongst themselves. There's a diversity among them. There's one that was a female, more direct descendant, but truly. And like the current scion of the House of Habsburg is some happy-go-lucky Austrian kid who like hangs out at raves and stuff. He's younger than you or I. He's having a great time, and he's like, "Yeah, fuck the Habsburgs. I don't care."
Good for him.
Yeah.
Took a few generations, but
I think Sweden or Denmark just recently, as almost as a legal technicality, just like unroyalified, undignified a bunch, because it was just getting expensive. Like, no, only these ones are the royals. Because you have a bunch of kids and it just keeps going and going. Right?
Yeah.
That's nature.
And the state was supporting them somehow because of that? Or?
Yeah, they had some pension or title. This is Christina.
Well,
of
that's
Denmark
happening with the Windsors. I mean,
get rid of them. Who cares? Not kill them. I'm not saying that at all.
Yeah.
They don't have any real power. Just make it be like something. Once a year he has to go and pull a sword from a stone.
Well, the other side of that, earlier you said, "Oh, isn't it nice we live in a better world than this notion of inherited." I mean, I can't remember what words you said, but
inherited aristocracy.
Right, but as long as we continue to have generational wealth, it's sort of, I mean, it's not.
It's coming full circle.
It's not gone.
It's coming full circle. No, you're absolutely. But that's the problem. It accumulates so much that then they go, you know what? Let's just make a legal distinction between us. So we're heading in that direction.
And if you're you call it a death tax. If you're against taxing that estate wealth, you call it a death tax, which is very appealing to, I mean, this is what the conservatives have done here. The wealthy have done.
Yes.
Instead of calling it a wealth tax or an inheritance tax, they call it a death tax.
They're self-enslaving.
Right.
Great use of words.
Right.
Who wants a death tax?
Just the rhetoric, right?
Yeah.
Speaking of rhetoric,
it's an idea that's so embedded. I have even a hard time. I mean, because at the heart of the idea is property, right?
Yes.
Like you can talk about generational wealth and be sort of high-minded about it. But if you want to do anything about it, it really comes down to the idea of property at all, right? Like, I'm an agent who owns some things. I probably own more debt than I own things. But, I'm not saying I want my great-great-grandchild to be overly privileged, but because the idea of property is still so embedded in the my culture that I inherited, I have a hard time thinking, well, I should be able to pass on my 2 pianos to my kid if I go. Right. I want my niece or nephew or child to get my drum set.
Right.
My drum set, that's mine. Of course, I think you could make a good case that there's a question of scale here.
Yeah.
If you own millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of actual capital, like factories, or even if it's just even if it's just magnetic money,
a hedge fund,
a hedge fund, but still you have to it really comes down to the idea of property, I think, because I think I own things.
I think a very mild thing would be, if you actually think about it, is like, okay, when you die, you can only pass on. We have an absolute cap on the amount that parents can get, that children can inherit from their parents. Let's make it $50 million.
Yes, please.
Anything up to that point, you can completely pass on to your disgusting child. But if it's above that, it goes into a fund that helps orphans.
Yeah. Works for me.
If you tried to propose that in Congress, their heads would explode, their intestines would fly from their bodies. They would shriekingly shrill themselves to death.
I think Huey Long even had something like that in his platform, but he also, even for the living, he had a sort of a proposed cap on income.
Well,
Yeah.
there was one until 30 or 40 years ago. The estate tax was very high.
Yeah.
Mm.
It was progressive tax rates.
It was really, that changed. I
Has
think
re-
under Reagan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Reagan is
But-
the reason we're falling apart.
Yeah. But it is complicated because I've always felt, I am not rich. For my age, I really am. But I mean, I was hungry when my kids were born and I started teaching at PLU. I couldn't go buy a pizza. I couldn't afford that. But I also then, as I started to get more wealthy, I said, it's not right for me just to worry. Gets complicated for an individual. I've got to help other people. I always have felt that way. I shouldn't just treat my kids more important than other kids. I should treat them all the same. But now as an older grandpa, I worry about my grandkids. Oh, God, I worry about them. And so I'm thinking, geez, what's my retirement money doing? How much money can I leave to them? Honestly.
Right?
I mean, it's really a complicated individual. And I mean, I mull over it. I think about it. And but I am all for a progressive tax. I mean, I really think that I don't think
You have to.
Well, I mean, when
If you want it to last.
well, what's his name on CNN? The black guy that does
Don Lemon?
no. He does these things on race in America.
Oh.
United Shades of America.
Oh.
Oh, okay. He has one of the episodes where this guy says, "What does it mean when your zip code numbers tell you more about what your future is going to be than anything else?"
Mhm.
I mean, that's a poignant statement. That is a very good journalism too, by the way.
We are going back into an aristocrat serf distinction.
Yeah.
And here's a conversation I actually had 5 years ago with a coworker at a feed store I used to work at. It was when the election season was really getting underway, and he said to me, and whenever I bring this up, I feel like I have to. I'm actually quoting him, and I wasn't provoking him. I didn't entrap him rhetorically. He pretty much said this himself. He said, "Well, it would be better if things were back the way they used to be." And I'm like, "What do you mean by that?" And he's like, "Well, when we had like kings
And
stuff."
slaves and
And I was like, "Thank you so much. So much. That is a story I'm going to hold on to for the rest of my life to bring up in conversations like these, because for him, the hustle and bustle and mess and decision making and argumentation that goes into a functioning democracy is too much work. It's far better to simply know who's in charge and take your orders." Guess which branch of the military he was in? The Marines. So the American conservatives are self-enslaving. That's what they want.
yeah.
They want King Trump. They want the royal family of Trump
They
to
do.
tell them what to do,
Yeah.
so that they never have to think about anything again, because it's easier to be a serf and know who God's anointed is than to sit there and have to make decisions, which is tough. And it gives me a headache when I have to think about the future of my country and maybe the nature of my country, or maybe even the future of humanity and it's our place in the world. Well, far better to just take orders.
Well,
He said
I'm
that
go-
to me unprompted,
I'm
and he fucking meant it.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Maybe that was just a sort of semi-reasonable response to the
Yeah.
psychic poison that is the result of a non-functioning democracy.
Yep. You're
Right.
not,
Where
that's
it
also,
doesn't-
you're correct.
Doesn't matter how hard I think about it.
Yeah,
My
what the
life
fuck?
doesn't get any better.
Yeah.
Right?
What's my vote going to do?
Yeah. So I can sympathize or empathize a little bit with someone disenchanted with, I got to wrestle with these. Well, I like thinking personally.
Yeah.
I don't mind thinking about it, but I just get a little bit weary of
Oh, yes, you're not.
the idea of
That's a good devil's advocate, man.
the idea of a benevolent king is naive and romantic and sort of nursery. It comes from reading the old stories and
Yeah.
the fantasy books and
Good
whatever.
King Wenceslas.
Of
You know.
course, a benevolent king, not a benevolent queen.
Right.
I mean, we're stuck in that.
Well, there have been, yeah.
I know, but I'm saying.
Yeah.
But that reminds me.
Or
Talking about,
the guy I voted in who I was pretty sure was good, but then was hamstrung
Yeah.
by an antagonistic Congress or
Yep.
Yeah.
whatever the fuck it might be.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
That reminds me when you talk about that last summer when I'd given this talk on. Basically, the talk is we have a past, we have a future. We understand the past, the future looks bleak. We're an evolved species that understands that. We have to make choices that make it better for our great grandchildren. Okay, all right. That summarizes the modern humanist view.
Yeah.
My view, it does. And afterwards, this one young guy came up and he said, "I'm a nihilist." I could talk about other people that talk to ask questions. When you're a nihilist, he says, "We'll make choices, but they won't make any difference." That's nihilism defined, I guess.
Yeah.
I'd never thought about it.
Essentially.
So he just said the opposite. I mean, whatever choices we make, they don't make any difference. That's his point. That was pretty. That was like hit me in the face. But I think he might be more right than I am. Understand that I don't think we're capable of making a choice for our great grandchildren.
No. Can't.
Are we even evolved to do
No,
so?
we're not.
No.
Well, that's the problem. We evolved
You can't.
because you can only live. I mean, why do women go through menopause? Well, because they can help grandchildren. They don't survive long enough to help great grandchildren. Do you understand?
Right. There are no long-term plans
No.
in an infinite universe.
And so here you have this dilemma. We're an evolved species capable of understanding who we are and what the future looks like.
That's why it's morality that matters.
Yeah.
Why you do the thing is far more important than some elaborate plan where you know all
That's
the
right.
variables.
And that's why the most important philosophy is pragmatism.
Yeah.
Where you work if you want a better world, you work with what works, and then if you have to adjust, you adjust. There are no simple answers.
That's evolution.
But
Evolution
you
adjusts.
adapt.
I probably, I mean, not probably. I have my own biases, but somewhere along the line, I somehow learned to think of pragmatism as a bad word, and probably not for what it represents as a word that means something in philosophy or worldview, but
Yeah.
I think maybe I just associated it with shitty people doing shitty things in the name of pragmatism.
Yeah.
You know,
can't
so
use it as an excuse.
I have bad associations with the
Well,
word.
yeah,
I don't know where I got them. I can't.
Well, but I mean, if you have a utilitarian, I did it because I thought it was going to have the most common good. Well, it didn't. I mean, that mistake is made there too,
Right.
and it's also for I intended to do well if you're a Kantian, and that
Right.
didn't work either. The point is what works, and then you have to. This is where it doesn't work. This is because what we want to work is justice and fairness, and right.
Right.
And unfortunately, the power structure is such that it doesn't work that way.
Right,
Okay,
but
so
then when
now-
someone says things need to be more just and more fair, someone says, "Oh, but we got to be realistic, right?
Right.
We've got to be pragmatic about this. We can't ask for this because we'll never get that through Congress, or
Right.
we can't afford it. That's
Yeah.
not practical."
Yeah.
I'm associating things that are probably unfair to be associated. Practicality, pragmatism.
I think
you
you
know,
are.
I shouldn't do that, but
I think pragmatism is different from practicality. Practicality, except in the sense you use the best tool, but you use the best tool for what? Use the best tool
Right.
to understand ourselves better and make the future better. And the only way you can do that is to understand history, learn from your mistakes, and move on. And be willing to learn, to recognize when you make mistakes. That's how I define pragmatism.
Okay, so I'm going to hijack this conversation and just
Okay.
take that fucker around because the Chinese are sitting in a situation where they can look at their own history of pragmatic adaptation
Mm-hmm.
and look at the situation confronting them in the modern world and go, yes. Like they've been, in a sense, waiting for this moment of industrialization for 800 years. Because the Southern Song dynasty started to industrialize And then something happened called the Mongol invasions that upset that process. So they can look at, because what you guys were just describing of pragmatism and how do you actually do the right thing where it's the outcome that matters. It's not about me feeling like a better person. It's the outcome. They can look at their Confucianism.
Yeah.
They're riding a wave that has not broken since the Zhou dynasty. There's been plenty of setbacks and holy shit. But the confluence of high technology, a Confucian cultural substrate, the pragmatism, the idealistic pragmatism of communism, which basically says you have to take care of your lower classes and you work on poverty alleviation and that sort of thing. Right? Is that such a thing? Idealistic pragmatism?
That's what gave me pause. I don't know.
Is that an oxymoron?
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either.
But
I'll say
my dumb Western dualistic brain thinks that those are opposite sides.
the two become one.
But of course, I've said before, the it is never two. So
Yeah, and I mean, it's fascinating if you look at the Great Learning. If you read the Great Learning, which I highly recommend, it is just banging into the heads of these students like, you must do the right thing, not because it makes money, but because it's the right thing to do. But if you do the right thing as a government official and as a government itself, usually wealth is the result. Wealth is you scatter the wealth among the people, and that's the way you gather the people. They meant it, and that was 1,000 years. This is before communism.
Yeah. Well, of course, there was abuse of that too.
Of course.
But I mean, students cheating and all this stuff on.
But that was the message.
The message of, if you combine Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, you have the family,
Yep,
the universe, and
society.
the society. I mean, and no miracles.
Yep.
Right? Okay, but you brought up communism.
Yeah.
I read a quote today. I think it was Arthur Kessler, who was a communist at one time. And became very anti-communist. He says, how do you define capitalism? He said, well, bad people or people mistreating people. How do you define communism? The opposite. Is that good?
That's very good. I've
very
never
good.
heard that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I read it today. Yeah.
Dude,
Yeah.
that will...
holy crap.
Yeah.
This is different people. It's a great quote. We should quit because I told my wife I'd be home by 7. So.
Oh, okay. Well, we didn't even get to Russia and China.
Well, that's all right. We'll do it
Aristocracy.
again. This is fine. The weather's fine. We
Yeah.
can do it as long as I don't have to drive in the dark. I'm fine.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's
Signing off.
great. People mistreating people.